My name is James Kaposztas. I'm also known as Cap, which was a nickname given to me by a friend who used to write for Marvel Comics. That, and also it's easier to pronounce than my last name and easier to remember. Yeah, I live in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. I don't know if anime is really popular in Perth Amboy, but in other towns and such along the East Coast, it is. I grew up with anime in the 1960s with shows like Eighth Man, Gigantor, Astro Boy. The show that really got me going was Star Blazers, which was originally known as Space Battleship Yamato in the mid to late 70s. So I've pretty much been watching it all my life. It just took one instance when I was like 8 years old and I had taken apart a tin car and I noticed that the writing was the same as the signs in the cartoon I was watching. So at that point I realized that no, this is not produced in the United States anymore. And it has storylines that get you hooked. AMV is short for anime music video. When I first started doing these, I referred to them as anime videos in general. But someone else had come up with the term anime music video, which is pretty much what it is because, you want to watch an anime video. It's like, do you want to watch a music video? Do you want to watch a fan parody? Do you want to watch a fan sub? Do you want to watch a sub, dub? Anime video can mean the actual physical material. Anime music video defines it as this is a music video that uses anime for its visuals. Anime is animation. Anime is the ability to tell stories or entertain people like movies are, except instead of using some live action film, you're using stuff that in the old days used to be done on cells and recorded at 24 to 30 frames a second. That would either do everything from sell a product to tell a complicated and implicated story. These days, a lot more is done using computers as assists. And there are still some people who still swear on doing actual film cells to tell a story. Well, one note would be that I told you about that book called Reading Manga, Watching Anime. Fred Patton did a very good timeline in there about the early days of fandom. That's someone who should be interviewed if you should ever do a documentary on the early days of anime fandom. But as far as I know, the anime fandom rose out of what was known as the Cartoon Fantasy Organization, which was started by Fred Patton. There would be people who would start like little chapters. The first East Coast chapter was started by a Mr. William Thomas III of Philadelphia, who became the first East Coast member of that organization in 1982. He held his first meeting out of his apartment in like October or November of 82, and he figured he'd get like 10 or 20 people come over. He had 100 people show up, cramming into a small room. The best example would be if you ever saw one of the Simpsons couch gags where like everyone in Springfield shows up and it goes back and you've got like a circus going on in the background. That would probably have described his first meeting. But eventually you had CFOs start chapters in places like Philadelphia, New York. Other groups picked up like the Boston Japanimation Society would hold monthly meetings, usually at either friends' houses, or if it got larger, they would get rooms at colleges or at hotels or such. I first came across anime, as everyone knows it. Someone had brought 16mm prints to a Creations comic book convention in 78 and was showing them at a table where he was trying to sell off anime goods, and had them show some of these episodes up on the big screen in the room, and you'd have this room that hold like maybe 100, 200 people suddenly go to overflowing in an instant. They'd be showing some old TV show or something, but the minute the anime started or the Japanese live action started, every space was filled in. Every chair was filled in. The aisles were filled in. There were people lined up 3 or 4 deep outside watching it. But eventually I first got introduced to anime at a PhilCon in 1981 because of this room called the Gamelon Embassy, where they were showing this movie called Be Forever Yamato, which was the 4th in the Space Battleship Yamato series of movies from that time. And I remember getting told by one Rob Fenelon that, please don't kill me. This ends the tape that I got from someone from Japan who was there. His parents recorded it at SP speed. So for a 2.5-hour movie, it ended at 2 hours. So I had this one scene where the big baddie is threatening to blow up the Earth. Kodai turns to the captain and goes, "Captain, what do we do?" Captain goes, And then all of a sudden the tape rewinds. It's like, talk about bad place to break. It's like going, and I deduce that the murderer is. Please turn to page 67. You get to 67, and it's like 66, 68, or 65, 66. 66 is torn out of the magazine. The fandom during the 80s was slowly finding its way. I think one of the first, the CFO would do anime rooms at World Science Fiction Convention, which is an annual convention that happens every September. I remember in 1980, the first one I saw, Fred Patton was hosting a screening of a subcopy of Lupin III, Castle of Cagliostro, and he was handing out these surveys for TMS, Tokyo Movie Shinza, that would, what did you think of this? So he was doing early market research for them. But the first con that I think had a dedicated anime room aside from the Lunacons was Baycon out in California in the late 80s. But the first actual anime con that I guess could claim itself was Anime Con was Anime Con 91, which was in San Jose, California over Labor Day weekend. I went there. It's like a lot of the East Coast fans went over there. I looked at the West Coast fans. I think a lot of the East Coast fans dropped out because these kids are younger than us. But it's like, fandom is a fandom. I grew up in the 70s going to Star Trek conventions. I actually met Gene Roddenberry. I think it was from these conventions that people realized that there were communities. I remember one friend of mine, Walt Amos, had mentioned that he was going around getting people's addresses because they didn't know if there would be another anime con the next year. Was this like, a one-trick pony? Would it be the only game there is? Would there be a Anime Con 92? Of course there was. It became now known as Anime Expo, which has been going strong since 1992. And Anime Expo led to other conventions. To a point that you can go any weekend. There's more than one convention a weekend. Heck, we've got one in New York this weekend. So what does that tell you on how it's grown? I think I was probably the first one. I'm sure there are others that have done that. There was I think I'd read something about in Japan, they were sort of doing that where they'd take a straight visual and run their own music underneath, but, without cutting. Providing their own soundtrack, like, say, doing a Godzilla battle to the end of the 1812 Overture. Or it's like, I don't like that Eiji Tsuburaya music, let me try running Sex Pistols in the background. Or something else. Everyone thought it was amusing, or it's like, I've never seen something like that before. It's a lot better than what they do on MTV at the time, because a lot of the stuff that was running was mostly recordings of performance. Maybe they would do some drama or use it as a background. There's one Metallica video where they took clips of the movie, the 30s movies, Charge of the Light Brigade, and threw it together with clips from of them performing their song, or Number of the Beast, where they used clips from Godzilla movies and other monster movies for effect. The way I found about Otakon was in 1994, I was asked to do the opening video for Anime Next, which only ran 2 years. This guy came a friend of mine came up to me and said, I just got back from Otakon and one of your music videos ran at Otakon. Did you enter a video? And my first question was, what video? The second one was, what's an Otakon? True story. It's like I've never heard of Otakon before that was brought up to me. And I had found out I had done a video, another story video using Living Color's Cult of Personality using Mobile Suit Gundam. Originally, it started out telling Giran Zabi's story as the cult of personality around him, and then evolving down to Char Aznable in Counterattack of Char. In fact, through dumb luck, I managed to sync, he's giving this speech, and I synced up to FDR's famous, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And that just came out of dumb luck that it happened to sync up right. The first AMV that I did was done to the Beatles' All You Need Is Love, using clips from Space Battleship Yamato that never made it onto American screens under the release name of Star Blazers. I created my first AMV in November of 1982. At the time, I had one VCR, which back in 1978, the most advanced feature it had was one time recording where you basically set the time, you turned the dial to where you want it, you put the tape in and you turned it off. It would start up at the time and continue until the tape ran out or somehow stopped. When I first started, I had purchased a top-of-the-line machine which had the feature of audio insert and a flying erase head. And it had come out from me seeing MTV, which had started up the year earlier, and also watching anime and noticing that some shows, the stories were continuous and episodic and built on each other, as opposed to cartoons where everything happens in one 20-minute burst. You could easily get hooked into it. I initially got into them in college because I had enrolled in a communications course, because back in the late 70s when I graduated high school, cable TV was booming. All these new channels were coming up, which meant new opportunities for employees or to get into cable and video that way. And it became an offshoot of doing work in college. And what led to me doing it was a mixture of listening to lots of music growing up and watching anime on TV, although it was cartoons. And the storylines on certain shows, which were continuous, hooked me. Star Blazers was like that. Each season was its own enclosed story, so you would watch it and you'd want to watch the next episode. And I started noticing that songs, well, I've known this for a while, that songs were ways to tell stories. They have been since time immemorial. Many epic events or such are told in song, like the child's rhyme about ring of roses, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, all fall down. That was talking about the bubonic plague. And there are other songs, both political and love songs and such, that always tell stories. And I would find by listening to music that there were stories to be told that matched certain visuals. And that's what got me into the idea of matching anime with music, because there were songs that told stories. And this was a continuation of the story, except to a new medium. The first AMV came about from me finally buying a second VCR, which had at the time flying erase head and audio dub on it. What it meant was if you had an existing video signal, you could lay down your own audio tracks and overlay video on it, hence video editing. How it came about was I was intrigued by the fact that there was shows out there where they had one continuous story over an entire series of episodes, and also the storytelling quality of music. At the time, PBS Channel 13 in my area, WNET TV, was running a show from 1967 called The Prisoner. And at the time, there was an episode running called Fallout, where after 17 episodes, Patrick McGowan's character, number 6, finally gets out of the village, this unique prison. And as part of the escape, him and 2 other people have a shootout with those that are holding him, and in the background, the song All You Need Is Love is playing. And a couple of months earlier, I had seen episodes of what was then known as Star Blazers, but is also known as Space Battleship Yamato, or Space Cruiser Yamato, where you had lots of violence happening, and that usually got cut out of the show, or the explanation was our robot soldiers fell. But, watching one episode of Yamato 2, where they're storming the Atlantis fortress, you see people falling left, right, and crosswise. One of the more memorable ones was Sergeant Knox, or Saito as he was known as in the episode, ends up having a death scene worthy of John Wayne. But in the end, this 10 to 15 second scene is cut down to 3 seconds. And blanked it over by, Sergeant Knox got out right behind you, Whereupon you look at it and go, yeah, where is he? Well, there goes his arm, there goes his leg. I think that's his head. But the entire bit from the prisoner of them escaping and shooting their way out and all of this violence in this non-violent series sort of struck a chord. So tongue-in-cheek, that's how my first video named All You Need Is Love came about. If you were rating it today, the Japanese material would be PG-13 to R. Back then, you had to change things or cut violence out entirely because of the parents complaining about violence in TV in the 60s and the 70s, and now you see more violence on TV, and not just the news. When I grew up, the most violent thing you saw would be Gunsmoke or Hawaii Five-0. Now, those are pale compared to what's on TV. Not to mention growing up in the age of Vietnam and hearing body counts every night on the 6 o'clock news. Enough people had seen Star Blazers that when I first showed it in public, people got a good laugh out of it. I'm sure today people will either get a good laugh out of it or be horrified, or it's like, meh. But your tastes may vary. You have to look at it through the lens of time. Well, first off, it wasn't done on computers. This was all machine-to-machine editing, and a lot of it was sort of made up as you went. I discovered at an early age with the first VCR I had that editing out commercials by just hitting pause and restarting was editing in a way. So what I would do was first lay down the music, usually from a audio cassette, although one time I actually did it off a LP album wired into the machine, and then just starting the record and then stopping it, coming across an area and starting my own pre-roll or just starting up the playback a second or two before, and then hitting turning pause off, and then when I've got the footage, turning pause back on. Sort of like assemble editing, where you're taking part A and then assembling part B onto it and then part C, but instead of breaking control track, you're insert editing or laying it over. I know a lot of the terms may sound weird, but if you worked in 1-inch or broadcast formats, it makes sense. You're laying down something over an existing control track. Okay, before the age of digital, a lot of broadcast video was laid over an existing piece of tape, which had a black signal on it. The black signal could come from anything from recording stuff off the air to hooking up a camera into the record machine and laying down basically the foundation. And then you would build everything on top of it. Now it's just dropping things in and out of timelines, which has made stuff a lot easier and a lot less glitchier. The one problem I had was you would end up with what someone had referred to as rainbowing when you'd come out of one record to another, where you'd see like this rainbow effect start, going down the edge of the screen as the heads got up to speed. But people back then were willing to overlook it. Later on, I discovered that there were editing control boards manufactured. I think Panasonic had introduced the first home-to-home unit, but you had to buy two of the same machine to use it. And of course, there's the Sony RM440 controller, which sort of worked the same way. You just had two dials, you had time code or control track. Control track being a counter sort set to either 2997 or drop frame, or 30, which is full frame or non-drop frame, as it's known in the business. Linear editing is putting A, then B, then C, and not being able to go back and edit. The one problem with editing is if you're using assemble editing, you break control track every time you do an ed. Insert editing, it gets difficult because without a controller, you can basically crash over something that you don't want to erase. One example on a linear editing break I had was when I did a music video in early 1983 called Mr. Roboto done to sticks. Quick explanation on that would be the song and the music told the story of Char Aznavour, who was basically hiding in plain sight from those who wanted to kill him. So he was hiding behind a mask, and there was one scene where the song goes, "Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto, domo, domo, domo." And I had done on Domo, edit 1, arigato, edit 2, edit 3, Mr. Roboto, Domo, edit 4. And then I had accidentally stopped the record and then went to pick it up. So had like a flash of, on the first Domo was the robot he was flying in. Second flash was the robot he was flying in. Then it came back to that shot again, and then the second shot, and it somehow worked, while it was purely accidental. And I was sitting there for like 5 minutes. It's like, do I re-edit this? And decided, nah, it's good enough. I had the images synced up in my mind more or less. Sometimes the only challenge I'd have would be like, oh no, that's at like the end of this tape. I have to stop editing and fast forward the tape, or I have to go back to edit the tape, and making sure that the machine is in insert edit instead of hard record, which was the big challenge, was being disciplined to make sure that you don't hard record into something, because hard record then breaks control track. Control track is like film frames, which is another term that people probably don't understand these days. But the control track was a way of keeping the signal in sync. Like film frames, it would basically keep the film moving forward. It was sort of a way to sync and also to lock up in editing. If you want an example of breaking control track, ask anyone who's ever had videotape when they've had to break out of hard record or finish up a show and figure, oh, I'll just edit it on to the next one. And then you have like a little glitch. Nonlinear editing allows you to put in segments where you want to. Like if there's a certain line in a song that you want to use a certain scene, you can drop it in and clean it up, from my experiences in nonlinear editing, to make that part of the song work. And you can edit around it, you can tighten it up, you can make fades into it on computers. One example that I've got is a video which I will have to send you later that I'm working on, called Ticket to the Moon, which is using a series called Moonlight Mile. The song is from Electric Light Orchestra, and it's talking about someone basically leaving Earth and going to the moon. And in the story of Moonlight Mile, it's talking about two friends who have conquered like everything that's conquerable on Earth and decide to go be one of the first to go back to the moon. One is going through civilian ways, the other one's going through military ways. And it's the story of the one going through the civilian ways as he's working on his way to get his ticket to the moon. Like there was one scene that I had the visuals in idea, and I put it in on the song, where they're talking about paid the ticket, what more can I say? It's just one way, showing him sitting in the rocket ready to go. I laid that one down first and then built around it. Well, on linear editing, I would have to have the clips already laid out to add to it as I go along, while nonlinear, I'm able to drop in the appropriate clips. Another example I could give of linear versus nonlinear editing, because I ended up redoing this at one of my jobs, was a song that Rush did called Manhattan Project. The story was about the first atomic bomb. And I used it to Mobile Suit Gundam, because it starts out, imagine a time when it all began in the final days of a war, a weapon that could sell the store, showing Zaku's landing on Side 7 and discovering the mobile suit being built, and Amuro stealing it. At the end of the song, you have Amuro flying out of this explosion to imagine a time when it all began, the pilot of Enola Gay flying out of the shockwave. And the line goes, all the powers that be in the course of history would be changed forevermore. I would have to have edited that in linear going through. I was able to drop that sequence in because I was able to, no, take back. I was able to drop that footage in because I had it in mind, and also I was going to use it to build this one fade where Amuro jumps out of the thing he's flying out of and he's drifting in space, and it fades over to the Zeta Gundam transforming, and then a whole link on how mobile suits changed after that incident. You know, in linear editing, I was able to build it twice. Once by non-linear editing, which took a long time, and linear editing, which took a long time, then non-linear editing in the edit room, which the only time it took was I was using 2 or 3 machines to do crossfades back and forth between the machines. While in non-linear editing, what I can do is I can drop in the scenes and then have the computer figure out where the fade will be without having to go back like 20 or 30 frames to start the fade. My archiving was right down onto a VHS tape. And then from time to time, I would loan it to people. Like I loaned my tape to one Robert Fenelon, who at the time he was spreading anime to other fans by making copies of stuff in a video collection that he had gone through tape trading and direct contact from Japan from people. All now would be considered illegal or frowned upon. But back then, you know, you're 20 and something and you don't really know better, and licensing and stuff hasn't become such a big issue. Yes, the first actual showing that I had of it was I had shown it out of a party room called the Gamelon Embassy, which was originally started up at various conventions by a bunch of other fans, and I sort of took it over at PhilCon. You know, we'd have people come in, sit around the room, watch the VCR hooked up to the TV, and watch a anime movie or an episode. I had shown at PhilCon 82.1, which is a science fiction convention down in Philadelphia. They were showing a Japanese anime movie as part of their video program called Arrivederci Space Battleship Yamato. And I talked to the people running the VCR. I said, hey, I've got this thing that I did, and can I show it before the movie? It might work as a great lead-in. And at the time, I had only edited 2 AMVs. Well, one AMV and a comedy AMV. The comedy AMV was basically taking the show Star Blazers, second season against the Comet Empire, where the Argo is flying in, its radios are down from an encounter from the Comet Empire, and there's this new ship, the Andromeda, coming at them, and he's having an argument about our radios are out. They should realize we're the incoming thing. We're not getting out of the way, so you end up having both ships sort of run into each other. At the time, I had a copy of Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan. So I re-edited it so that you would have 1 minute, they're talking on the Argo about landing rights, cut to the Enterprise slowly approaching the Reliant. And what's amusing was there's one line in there where it's like, he has to turn off. Any captain who flies a ship as big as that must know the rules. Cut to Savick going, Captain, may I inform you of Article 12 when approaching a vessel when communications haven't been established? Mr. Spock chimes in, Lieutenant, the Admiral is well aware of the regulations. So it sort of matched back and forth, and it ended badly for the Argo. Everyone got a laugh out of both videos. And then started the movie. The anime movie of Arrivederci Yamato, which was later made into Space Battleship Yamato 2 afterwards, drew a large crowd of people who had never seen it. It had its laughs, it had its shocks. It had an ending where everybody on the ship died heroically. At the end, you have Captain Wildstar, or as he was known in the show as Susumu Kodai, is flying the Yamato to try and destroy this large ship that Zordar had just finished bombarding the moon with and pebbling the Yamato, gave this long speech about how great he is and such, and he's flying off in this dreadnought. So Kodai takes the Yamato and decides to ram the the Comet Empire Dreadnought. So he's basically dying heroically. At the end of the movie, they're playing the Yamato theme, which starts off with Saraba Chikyu Amida Sokume wa Uchu Senkam Yamato. The thing is, people are picking up on the song and singing it back towards the screen. That showed how popular and effective it was. Anyway, for the American version of Star Blazers, when they got to that bit, they rearranged it. Kodai was going to go, Wildstar was going to fly off with his best girl by his side to ram into the Comet Empire Dreadnought, and he was going to bail out. That was the American version. The Japanese version was a suicide run. So that got changed around the end of the TV series, where this one Do Ex Machina heroine comes in and destroys the Comet Empire ship by herself. So that was the change between the TV series and the movie. Although, personally, if you can, I recommend catching a Arrivederci Space Battleship Yamato or a Farewell Space Battleship Yamato. If you can, it's probably on YouTube or other sources over there. Back in the 90s, someone tried doing a live-action redub of it. The redub wasn't too well. They changed the wave motion gun into something called the undulation cannon. True story. You look at it like undulation gun, that sort of sounds kind of perverted. But that's what like wave motion guns sort of translated out to in the Japanese, I think. As I said, if she should ever do a documentary on the early days of anime fandom, there are a lot more stories about how stuff got transferred around or misread or mislost in translation. So a lot of what I do is considered, I don't know, under the table, I guess you'd call it, because guaranteed, if the people that had the rights objected about it, I would basically be doing this in jail. Probably because I break, anyone who does an AMV in a way sort of breaks copyrights, but I think it's covered under fair use these days. It's sort of a grayscale thing. I'm not really sure about that. I'm sure there are better people who can explain the legalities of it. Initially, I did it as a hobby, not as something that can be broadcast. One of the ways which led to not many of my videos actually getting out on the market, because also at the time, there were comic book conventions where people were selling anime on videotapes. There are some dealers that at the time, there's a book called Roman Album, which was a book which had drawings and such of the production of there. There were people unscrupulous enough who would sell photocopies of the material in there from their tables or their magazines like, anime. I forget, My Anime and such, where they'd include stickers and posters. Some unscrupulous dealers would buy the book for $5 and sell the posters for $10 or $20. It's like this is coming in free in the magazine. They're selling the posters separately. And the scary bit was back then people were willing to pay for it. I was leery in the early days of generally like saying, hey, here's this neat thing I'm doing. I was afraid of copying, of people doing copies and doing it their own. I was afraid of walking into a dealer's room at a science fiction or a comic convention and finding my videos for sale.
Did that ever happen?
No, it didn't, thank God. I was basically afraid I would find myself suddenly getting cease and desist notice for stuff that I gave away freely and someone was making profit. I found it sort of disgusting that I'm doing something for pure art and pure enjoyment and someone else is making a profit off of it. I guess everyone thought, first off, I didn't know that there was an AMV community till years later. I guess, before people start realizing that there was an AMV community that, everyone sort of thought that they were the center of the universe, that, I'm doing this in a bubble. I've got this wonderful thing. I have got to show it. Well, to tell you the truth, between 1982 and 1987, I guess you'd call it, I was pretty much it. There were other people that were slowly, starting to do it because of Rob putting my AMVs at the end of tapes that he would trade. I guess people got that. The first time I actually saw someone else do it was someone who called themselves You Know who had done the song Hair from the musical Hair, done to all of these characters in anime who had one thing in common: long, wavy hair. I'd gotten asked for many months afterwards, did you do that video? Did you do that video? First off, I didn't, because they'd actually laid down video graphics saying, You Know Who now presents. And I didn't have that technology. I was still doing two machine edits. But then, other people started doing it, then more. So slowly I think it was like people finding themselves in a vacuum, doing stuff and thinking that they were the first. I was just handing out my videos through trades and such on tape. And an interesting side story, by March of 1983, I had put together 30 minutes worth of material, both parody videos and music videos. Another example of a storytelling video is the song Yesterday by the Beatles, where it's telling the story from one of the Yamato movies, Be Forever Yamato, where Sumo Kodai had lost Yuki trying to escape from an invaded Earth. And it shows him polishing a fighter, and I start cutting back and forth between all the scenes and the relationship to the point that he loses his girlfriend to the song Yesterday, and it worked. A couple of years later, Rob Fenelon told me a story about meeting one of the representatives of the show, Yoshinobu Nishizaki, who was the money man behind the show, and that video had gone over to his office, and his secretary was brought to tears by the song, because Yesterday is a popular karaoke song in Japan. Anyway, I started doing these anime videos that by the time LunaCon came around in March of 1983, I had about 20 or 30 minutes. So I said, hey, why don't we run this as a filler? Because the movie's going to end short, the TV show's going to end short. So why not run it as an audience warm-up? Anyway, at the end of the show, I'm taking apart the equipment, and someone said, did you do those music videos? I said, yeah, I did. I said, have you ever thought of doing them for a living? At the time, I was pretty much looking at becoming a radio DJ and working somewhere. Instead, I started redoubling my efforts and working more in video. And that eventually led to me working in TV and video for the last 30-something years. One story I was telling you was a Facebook friend of mine who introduced herself from Hungary. Mentioned when she was younger going to a convention in Hungary, and they're bringing up this thing where they'd done showings of AMVs, and I guess the MC had said, the first AMV was done by a Hungarian. Yay! That Hungarian is in the United States. Boo! And since I am of Hungarian origin, or, my great-grandfather came from Hungary before the First World War, it's like, I guess they could put me up there with other famous Hungarians or Eastern Europeans like Nikola Tesla. Although they are sometimes, I feel, more historical, like Philo T. Farnsworth, the guy who came up with the concepts and ideas of television. But nobody remembers him. They remember more David Sarnoff. Well, the first one is time. Since I'm working full-time, that doesn't leave too much time to do other stuff. The other thing is interest. Back then, there were very few choices on material you could use, Now it's like it seems everything is brought over, good, bad, and ugly. There's so much material there that what I'd do is I'd watch something once, I'd remember enough, and maybe a song or two would pop up in my mind to do. There's so much stuff out there. It's like, where do you pull the time together to actually come up with an idea? It's like, I remember the first convention I entered in, there were like maybe 20 music videos, and there was no real turnaway. Now, it's like conventions have showings of stuff for best anime video, and then there's overflow rooms and bests of. You go on YouTube, you can type in a song name and an AMV version will pop up, or if you put a extension AMV in the search box, something will come up. So it's become a lot broader and a lot easier to find. But the main problem is there's so much material and so little time. You would have to be really, really dedicated to a show to find the time and the material. Like in the beginning, my first couple of videos were done to Space Cruiser Yamato or Star Blazers. And then somebody had complained, hey, why are all your videos done to the Beatles and Star Blazers? My first non-Beatles, non-Star Blazers video was Mr. Roboto, done to a Styx song called Mr. Roboto because it was a culmination of the right time and the right place for the visuals and the music to come together. I listen to songs these days on the radio and think, yeah, I can probably cut a video to that, or I can come up with a video to that. Unfortunately, there are so many songs out there that it's like if you threw a name at me, chances are I'd probably come up with a idea pairing on other bits. It's like I've heard the song, I've heard the visual, and now that I'm on camera, I have no memory whatsoever might work on it. I've seen some really good videos like a song from My Chemical Romance called Welcome to the Black Parade that someone had done to Giant Robo, and they called it Welcome to the Robo Parade. Or Nowhere Fast from Streets of Fire done to Redline, which is really good. Or another song someone I know of had done called This Isn't What I Meant, This Isn't What We Meant from Sabotage. It's a very gut-wrenching, soul-searing song done to Evangelion that works. And of course, I've also seen musicals, songs done to stuff. Like I did a video to Pippin's intro song, Magic to Do, giving an explanation on anime, where you had a line about intrigue, plots to bring disaster, humor handled by a master. You'd find different scenes to throw in for romance, sex presented pastorally. Different songs are able to do that. I remember someone did a Death Note video to a song from Avenue Q called Schadenfreude, where back then you had a hard time trying to get the lips to sync up. Now through the software, it had it where it looked like the people were singing. One video that blew me away back in '95 at Otakon was, this was probably an early computer attempt or such, was a video where you had City Hunter and Cowboy Bebop on the same screen interacting together. Or another video where you had footage from Utena over something else, where they were able to layer on different things from different shows entirely and make up like a third item. I think first it started off with the tapes, people doing this and saying, hey, somebody did this, so can I. I've got some ideas. And that led to other people. Then it's like, hey, I can do this on my computer. Hey, I can get the material easier instead of having to trade tapes. I can get stuff streaming, or I don't know how people pull stuff off of streaming sources or go to various sources that I do not advocate, but people do what they will to get material. It just grew because there were other people who probably had songs that they thought, gee, that would make a great video, and I'm a big fan of this show, and they saw that and said, hey, if he's doing this or she's doing that, so can I. Another quick example I'll give was one Otakon. There were two people that entered the same song, I'm Gonna Be by the Proclaimers, the 500 Mile song, using the same visuals, but they never met, they never knew each other. They were both working literally in vacuums. And I think there was a decision to give them a special award or such, because these people were working in their own bubbles. This was pre-internet, and had come up with sort of the same idea, albeit each one used different shots. I think it would have gotten fishy if both of them were using the same shots. People like music, people like anime, people like sharing what they like. The easiest way to get someone interested in something would be to put up a good song with good visual. Another example I can give you two examples I can give you from the first major convention that I entered in videos at Otakon 95, was there are two songs. Sarah Brightman did a song called Captain Nemo, which someone had done video using Secret of Blue Water. And another person had done a video to Louis Armstrong's What a Wonderful World using footage from Fist of the North Star. Guaranteed the Captain Nemo video drew a lot more people into Sarah Brightman music. So she probably saw a spike in sales for that CD at the time. Another one that comes to mind, which promptly jumped out of my head. People would hear songs and, they would want to know more about the music or the song that was used based on the video. If you do a video good enough that people want to go out and look up the music, that's a plus. Because if you do something really good, now I remember another video from that year was someone had done Love Will Keep Us Alive by the Eagles to Grave of the Fireflies. This was such a soul-searing, depressing video that it came in 5th place. It's like I can't listen to Love Will Keep Us Alive and start tearing up at the video because if you've seen the movie, you know it ends badly. And the association with the song probably gave the Eagles extra sales on that one song. Unfortunately, you can't find that video on YouTube. I wish someone had put that video up or found a tape with it and put it up, because the video, it was obviously done on better equipment than I had. Was such a soul-searing video that you remembered it. You thought how horrible and how depressing it was, but it left a lasting impression on you. That's the thing about music, is a good song will leave a lasting impression on you. You mix it with the right videos, and every time you hear that song, you will think about that one video. Everyone is a potential editor. When I first got into broadcast video, you had to basically work yourself up in whatever company you were to become an editor. You would sit in, you would become a playback, which was like an apprentice editor, which meant you would change reels, you would do the Chiron graphics for a show with the hopes of eventually becoming a editor. Now, to give an example, the edit house I worked for like 13 years back in the 90s, I think they would charge for the entire suite. This is for editor and playback. Effect system including a switcher, a ADO or Ampex digital output where you could do effects like you could do a picture-in-picture, audio board, and 3 or 4 machines, 3 playbacks, and I think back in the day, it used to be like $700 an hour, minimum 8 hours. Where for like less than that, you could hire someone with a very good computer to do the job in less time for less money. Everyone has become an editor. That was probably one of the things which led to a lot of edit houses changing over. You would also have a large room where the editor would work with the client saying, I'll take that shot or that shot. Now in the same space that one edit room was there, you could have like 3 or 4 edit bays, and the editor would become the only person. They would go to a server and choose the shots, and they would do all the editing. So everyone has become an editor. I could even hire out someone to do their own editing, or I can basically shoot my own stuff and I can edit something up and put it up on everything from YouTube to try and sell it to broadcast. Not really sure. It's always seemed constant, and evolution is always constant. I guess, it's gone from tape to controlled editing to, from linear editing to non-linear, to eventually computers. It's like I once had someone tell me that, today, someone could easily make up an AMV on their smartphone. Where back then I had 2 VCRs, a tape deck, and okay, this sounds like a good point to drop that in. This sounds like a good point to drop that in. Today it's like, I'm going to use this as the end scene so I know when I get to it on the timeline, I'm almost finished. But that's pretty much it. As technology changes, other people come up and it's like, do stuff better. It's like one good example would be listen to the song Radio Gaga by Queen. You talk about the early days of radio, and then the second song is we watch the shows, we watch the stars on videos for hours and hours. We hardly need to use our ears. Our music changes through the years. The same can be said, but, AMVs, to quote that song again, you've had your time, you've had your power, you've had the power, you've yet to have your finest hour. So to those who are watching this, keep going, keep dreaming, and always follow whatever comes into your heart and whatever sounds good, even if it's like, the most obnoxious sounding song. If you can find a visual to tell a story, go for it. If you're really into it, I'd say go for it. Push the boundaries, explore whatever you can, do editing to tell stories, tell how you feel, move people. Lord knows I've seen enough of the videos which move people and get them to think, or at least sell them on the new show or a new musician. The comedies are all good. The drama ones, they're, you look at AMVs and a lot of the the contests have best drama, best romance, best comedy, best parody. I've seen people do ad parodies that are just as good as the others. I remember seeing an Ava parody done to Star Wars Episode 1 trailer music, or something else. I think it was One Piece done to a Pirates of the Caribbean ad. They would keep the audio on that and they'd put new video over it.